In 1983, a construction worker, Rodney Hurst, who was helping in the reconstruction of a period home in Salem, Massachusetts, discovered a small leather-bound journal in the rubble of a staircase. The name inscribed on the inside of the cover was Thomas Powell. The following is a transcription of the entries in that journal. Monday, August 7th, 1876, 9:15 a.m. My dear sister Elizabeth was not in her bed when I awoke this morning, nor was she in any other part of the house. Mother and father are worried sick, as it is very unlike her to wake in the night, let alone leave the house. There was no sign of anything. Miss, the window in our bedroom was closed, and her bed was still rumpled from her rest. I assured father we were not playing games, and that Elizabeth had been in her bed when I fell asleep. Father and mother checked the doors and windows of the house. All were locked, as they had been when we retired the previous evening, together. We searched every nook and cranny of the house. There is no sign of my sister. It is as though she has simply vanished into thin air. 2 p.m. The sheriff arrived at midday and inspected our home, finding, as my father had, that there was no sign of a disturbance or struggle. Naturally, he asked us questions. Has Elizabeth run away before? Was she upset about anything? Could she have left to meet a boy? The answers to which were all emphatically no. His next few questions were rather more disturbing. Had we noticed anyone strange lurking near the house? Had we had any gentlemen visitors in the home? Recently, had any strangers worked on the farm in the last month or two? Again, the answers were no. The sheriff closed his notebook, his brow creased, and told us he would organize a search party immediately. I pray she is safe somewhere on the farm or is hiding in the woods nearby. He said 7113 p.m. It wasn't until after the sheriff had left that something tugged at my memory. 2 days before Mother had given us a handful of pennies to buy candy at the general store in town. It was hot. We were walking in the shade of the shop awnings, and Elizabeth was playing a game where she tried to avoid the cracks in the sidewalk. We were passing the butcher shop when she overbalanced and bumped into a man looking into the window with a hiss. The man swung around and glared down. At us, he was the tallest man I've ever seen, even taller than Abraham Rankin, the headmaster of our school. For some reason, I can't picture his face clearly, but I remember he had sow skin, and the whites of his eyes were tinged and unhealthy, jaced yellow despite the warm summer day. He wore a heavy black cloak, and his clothes were all black under it. "Excuse me, sir," Elizabeth had said politely, but the man didn't say anything, just loomed over, his eyes staring into hers. As she looked up at him, her face went slack, and the whole day seemed to cloud over. I quickly took Elizabeth's hand and pulled her away. "Come on, Lizzie, let's get that candy." She resisted a few seconds, and I had to pull harder after we were safely away. I asked if she was all right. She resisted a few seconds, and I had to pull harder after we were safely away. I asked if she was all right. She didn't answer, just looked around, her eyes wide and blinking as if she'd just awoken from a nap. I glanced back. The stranger's gaze was still fixed on us. Something about him deeply unsettled me, and I hurried her along. I paused once more to look back before we entered the general store, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Lizzie was back to normal. By the time I caught up with her at the counter, I must remember to tell father in the morning, Tuesday, August 8th, 1876, 8:43 p.m., still no sign of Elizabeth. Search parties scoured the town and surrounding countryside all day, but found nothing. Father and I helped, and I told the sheriff about the mysterious stranger Elizabeth and I had encountered, thinking if he was still lurking about, he could be questioned. The sheriff dismissed the idea. The man might have anything to do with her disappearance. "I know the man you describe, it's Malcolm Blackwood. He owns the butcher shop, and more of them in Boston. He's a God-fearing man and left for Boston after making his bi-monthly inspection." "Are you sure, sir?" "Yes, I am, young man," the sheriff had said, because I tipped my hat to him as he left it in his coach the afternoon before your sister disappeared. "Now why don't you go home to your poor ma and leave this business to the grown-ups?" His tone left no doubt in my mind that the subject was closed, and I trudged home hours later. Mother is still hysterical with worry, while father assists with the search as it stretches into the night. I feel helpless. Elizabeth and I have rarely ever been apart for more than a few hours, and I cannot rest until she is safe at home again, all through the afternoon. My mind kept returning to the strange man, Mr. Blackwood. What if he's not as harmless as the sheriff believes? I found myself unable to stop peering through the window. Every few minutes, scanning our farm for any sign of the tall, cloaked figure. Part of me hopes to see him again, if only to satisfy myself that he did not speak. Elizabeth away somehow. Mother appears to be coping better as she says goodnight and tells me she's sure that Elizabeth will be found soon. I think she is being strong for me, but she makes me feel better, and I shut the bad thoughts from my mind. Wednesday, August 9th, 1876. We handed out missing posters today. People were very kind and offered to bring my mother food and sit with her that evening. Their kindness seemed to upset her more, and she ran off home. One of the ladies, Mrs. Mears, the seamstress, held me back and told me she would go to her. You keep handing out your posters. Son, she told me, it's the best thing you can do. I'll look after your ma. Not a half hour later, I overheard one of the sheriff's men talking. The gist of it was that he didn't think they'd find Lizzie alive and that he thought the search would be called off. Soon upset, I dumped the rest of the posters in a was-bin and headed home. Friday, August 11th, 1876. The sheriff called off the search for Elizabeth today. He says his men will keep investigating leads, but he couldn't ask the volunteers for any more of their time. Mother wailed pitifully at the news. She's now confined to her bed, overcome with despair. Father too crumpled at the news. I followed the sheriff out of the house. When he was leaving and asked him again about Mr. Blackwood, he looked annoyed but told me he had in fact interviewed the businessman, who assured him he had no idea about the disappearance. His coach driver confirmed they were on the road that evening. Wait, how did you interview him? I inquired. I knew he hadn't gone to Boston because he'd been leading the search efforts here in Salem the whole time. He was clearly exasperated at my question. Not that it's any of your business, but he returned this morning. Mr. Blackwood plans to sell the shop and is here to make preparations for the auction. He'll be renting a home here until it's done. Now go inside and comfort your poor parents. Father was sitting in his chair and staring vacantly when I returned inside. I feel empty as we face the endless uncertainty of Elizabeth's fate. But the question of Mr. Blackwood still preoccupies me. I want to talk to him tomorrow. I will make inquiries about where he is staying. Saturday, August 12th, 1876. I am shattered this morning. I found Mother dead by her own hand, hung from the porch. Rafters in her grief over Elizabeth. She found life unbearable. I am orphaned now in spirit. If not in fact, Father is but a shell, barely responsive, as the townsfolk take charge of Mother's burial. My only relatives, Aunt May, Father's sister, and her husband Richard, have been notified and are arriving from Boston next week. They are kind souls, and hopefully his sister can coax him out of the fugue he is in, even if she can't help. Solve the wounds of Elizabeth's disappearance and the loss of my mother because of the upset this day. I was unable to seek out information of Mr. Blackwood's whereabouts. I will attend to this tomorrow and pray I may find answers about dear Elizabeth's fate. Sunday, August 13th, 1876. I attended the Sunday service at our church today. People were very kind, and I felt bad that Father wasn't there. He had refused to even roll over when I attempted to wake him. Perhaps it was for the best, because someone else was in attendance. Mr. Malcolm Blackwood. He sat in the back, dressed in the same heavy black clothes like an undertaker, dressed for the winter, without the tall hat. I wondered how not even a bead of sweat shone on his pale face when it was so hot inside. I met his gaze fiercely, and he returned it unblinking, with the faintest curl of disdain on his lips. Next to him sat a solid man with thick, curly hair, his coach driver. I later confirmed when the service was over, I surreptitiously followed them, as Mr. Blackwood said his goodbyes to Father Franklin and other town dignitaries, being small and insignificant. It was easy to follow them through the crowd until they got to his coach. I hung back until they were underway, then followed. They didn't reach any great speed, as the streets are narrow and were busy with people. I followed at a safe distance until they reached a grand home on Essex Street. I waited long enough to watch them enter and then made my way home tomorrow. I will go and see the man and look him in the eye when I ask him if he knows anything of Liz's disappearance. Monday, August 14th, 1876. I am here in the gardens of the home on Essex Street. It is 2 hours past sundown. I decided against trying to talk to the man. If I'm being honest, he frightens me. There's something not right about him, and I don't want to alert him. If he is involved, not before I have proof. At least that's why I am here now. If he has a home here in Salem and was involved in Elizabeth's disappearance, perhaps she is in there held captive somehow. I'm going to find a way in and investigate. I am at the back porch. I will leave my journal under the stone steps and retrieve it. When I am done with my investigation, should something go wrong, it will be a record of someone approaches. There are no further entries in the journal of Thomas Powell. The journal was handed into Salem PD by the construction worker, who found it in 1983, and a junior detective, Penny Harrish, was assigned to investigate. There were no policing records from the period, but intrigued, the detective searched the database of the Salem Gazette and located 2 stories in 2 different editions of the newspaper. The first mentioned the disappearance of one Elizabeth Powell, age 8, on August 7th, 1876. The second, 2 weeks later, was under the headline "Family Tragedy Deepens," and told of the disappearance of Thomas Powell, age 12, and brother to Elizabeth, who was last seen on the 14th of August, 2nd, days after his mother committed suicide. A search warrant was issued based on the strength of the tie to the journal and the fact that records were located that indeed confirmed that one Malcolm Blackwood had resided at the address until 1911. No remains or any other evidence was found on the property. The cold case was closed, and the disappearance of Elizabeth and Thomas Powell remains a mystery to this day. For more creepy stories like this, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified if you enjoy more horror scary stories. Please subscribe Gothic Horror Stories channel